Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone tried to take over Mount Olympus? Not just anyone, but two enormous giants who believed they could defeat the gods. Well, get ready for one of the most daring and forgotten stories in Greek mythology. Today, we dive into the tale of Otus and Ephialtes, also known as the Aloads, two giant brothers who grew too big, too fast, and challenged the very rulers of heaven. They weren't monsters. They weren't villains. They were bold, smart, and almost victorious. This is their story, a story of ambition, strength, and ultimate downfall. Who were the Aloads? Let's go back in time, to the world of ancient Greece, where myths were full of gods, monsters, and heroes. The Aloads were twin brothers named Otus and Ephialtes. They were called Aloads because their mother was Iphimedia, who was married to a man named Aloads. But here's the twist. Their real father was said to be none other than Poseidon, the god of the sea. So these brothers were not just giants. They were demigods, half human, half god. And from the start, they were different. They grew faster than anyone had ever seen. Every year, they became bigger and stronger. By the time they were only 9 years old, they were already huge, towering taller than the trees and as strong as armies. But they didn't just grow in size, they grew in confidence too. They believed they were powerful enough to take on anything, even the gods themselves. Now think about that for a moment. Two kids, not even teenagers, deciding they could challenge Olympus? That takes guts. But it also sets the stage for something dangerous. What did they want? Unlike most monsters in Greek myths, the Aloads didn't want to destroy the world. They didn't want chaos. They wanted respect. They wanted to be gods themselves. Otus said he would marry Hera, the queen of the gods. Ephialtes claimed Artemis, the goddess of the moon and hunting. Yes, you heard that right. They wanted to take the wives of the gods. It wasn't just about power, it was about taking the throne. The Aloads believed that if they could reach the gods, they could fight them. And if they could fight them, they could win. Now, how would they do that? They had a plan, and it was crazy, but kind of genius. Building a path to the gods. Otus and Ephialtes came up with one of the wildest ideas in all of mythology. They were going to climb to Mount Olympus, not by flying or teleporting, but by stacking mountains on top of each other. First, they would take Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. Then they would stack Mount Ossa on top of it. And finally, they would add Mount Pelion on top of that. Imagine that for a second. 3 gigantic mountains piled on top of each other like a ladder reaching into the sky. It sounds impossible, but in myth, these brothers were strong enough to actually do it. The gods looked down and saw this happening, and for the first time, they were afraid. Even Zeus, the king of the gods, took the threat seriously. These weren't just giants. They were clever, and that made them dangerous. The gods respond. You'd think the gods would fight back with thunderbolts and divine weapons, right? But instead, something strange happened. Rather than going to war, the Aloads began doing something even more shocking. They started capturing the gods. Yes, really. They actually trapped Ares, the god of war himself, and stuffed him inside a bronze jar. Ares, the warrior of Olympus, was locked away for over a year. Imagine the god of war just sitting in a jar, helpless, while 2 giants ran wild. This moment shows just how powerful the Aloads were becoming. They weren't just a threat, they were winning. And the gods? They didn't know what to do. It took Hermes, the god of tricks and speed, to sneak in and free Ares. But the damage was already done. The Aloads were rising higher every day. How the giants were defeated. But here's the thing about myths, there's always a twist. The gods couldn't beat the Aloads with power, so they turned to wisdom. Enter Artemis, the goddess the brothers wanted to marry. She knew she couldn't fight them head-on. So she came up with a trick. Artemis transformed herself into a beautiful white deer and ran between Otus and Ephialtes as they were hunting in the woods. The brothers, thinking it was a magical creature, both raised their spears and threw them. But at the last second, the deer vanished. And instead of hitting the target, the brothers hit each other. Each giant's spear struck his brother. And just like that, they both fell. The strongest challengers to Olympus were gone, not from war, but from their own mistake. It was a clever trap. And it worked perfectly. The message behind the myth. So, what does this story really mean? The Aloads represent something more than just giant brothers. They are a symbol of ambition, youth, and overconfidence. They had power, but not patience. They had strength, but not wisdom. Their story is a warning. When you grow too fast, when you want too much, and when you ignore the advice of others, you can fall. even if you're a giant. In Greek mythology, this kind of pride is called hubris when someone thinks they're greater than the gods. And hubris always leads to a fall. It also shows us something about the gods. They weren't always the strongest, they were the smartest. And sometimes brains beat brawn. What happened after? After their deaths, the Aloads were sent to Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. In later stories, like Dante's Inferno, they are shown as huge, chained figures trapped forever for trying to rise above their place. But they were remembered. Poets, painters, and storytellers kept their tale alive, not because they were heroes, but because their story is unforgettable. The Aloads dared to reach for the sky. And even though they fell, they left behind a myth that still fascinates us today. So next time you hear about Zeus or Hercules, remember Otus and Ephialtes, the giants who almost made it. They weren't gods. They weren't monsters. They were dreamers who dared to take on Olympus. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more incredible myths and forgotten legends. This is Universe Advisor, where ancient tales come to life. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and never stop unmasking history.